Hello, everyone, and welcome to another limited set review. I'm going to apologize in advance. My voice is gone a little bit because I was at a concert last night. But this is War Crimes Uwu here with another limited guide, and today we're going to be talking about Foundations. This is sort of Magic's new answer to the core set. They've done a lot of a big rollout for this one, a lot of explaining. There's a lot of moving parts to this product. There's the default like normal draftable set. There's a jumpstart attached. There's some like new player decks, and then there's a starter collection that's supposed to emulate like a shoebox full of cards that your older cousin gives to you, but it's sort of tailored to make the new player experience as smooth as possible. I'm very excited for Foundations. It plays a lot like a core set. You know, it's very simple cards, not really any set mechanics necessarily, or not very fleshed out ones at least. And it's just, you know, it covers these very bread and butter evergreen draft archetypes, right? Green-black graveyard, blue-red spellslingers, blue-white flyers, just the kinds of archetypes that are very simple to grasp and that there is support for present in every set. So this one is going to be shorter than most of them because there's just not as much to talk about in terms of mechanics within the set. So we're going to talk about like how to sort through the spoilers and know what is actually in the limited format. We're going to talk about the best commons and uncommons by color. We're going to talk about the limited archetypes, and then we're going to talk about the best bombs in each color. Although I'll go ahead and spoil it for you. This is not a very bomby set. You know, like a lot of core sets, this is lower power, and that is reflected as well in the rares and mythics. So sorting through the spoilers, I just put 4 products up here, right? You've got the Play Booster, the Beginner Box, the Jumpstart Boosters, and the Starter Collection. The only things that we're going to be talking about today are the things that are found in those Play Boosters, as well as your Pre-Release Kit, which is just full of Play Boosters. That's not me saying that these other products are, like, bad to buy for whatever other reason, just that the cards, there are plenty of cards in the set that are not actually present in the actual draft format. So to avoid confusion, we're just talking about the draft format. We're only talking about the things that can be found in Play Boosters. That Starter Collection's a neat idea for product, right? There's a lot in there that you can use to build towards Standard or whatever. You know, the Jumpstart Boosters, Beginner Box, there's like all these different things. But if you go to Scryfall and you look up the set, they all have the same set symbol, but Scryfall separates it into like new cards, reprints that are found in the draft boosters, or the Play Boosters, excuse me. And then below that is the cards found in the Beginner Box of the Starter Collection, and those are not in the limited format. So if you saw a card rolled out during spoiler season that you feel like is missing from this video, like, oh, this is a huge bomb that you missed, or oh, Fred, I think this is actually the best, you know, uncommon in this color, whatever. Just note that it may not actually be in the draftable set, so it might be coming to Standard, coming to Pioneer, whatever, via this Starter Collection, but it's not part of the limited format. And these videos are only concerned with the limited format. We're concerned with draft and sealed. We're concerned with you know, the archetypes there. So we're not going to be talking about cards that don't appear there. I don't really do constructed reviews. So we're going to talk about the best commons and uncommons, I think, by color. And again, this is a relatively simple set. You're going to see a lot of just efficient removal, 2-for-1s, good stats on creatures. And we're going to start with white. We're going to start with the best commons. Now, this first card is Felidar Savior. This is a 3 and a white. I believe it's a new card. 2/3 Cat Beast with lifelink. When this creature enters, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 other target creatures you control. So right off the bat, I'm going to spoil a couple of the limited archetypes for you. There's one that cares about life gain. There's one that cares about +1/+1 counters. And then there's one that cares about going wide. And this really bridges the gap between all of those. It's worth noting that when we've seen this effect in the past, the creature has generally been capable of putting the counter on itself. Not the case here, which is kind of a bummer. So, you know, to get the maximum value out of this, you really are going to have 2 creatures already on the board, which is a little bit more of an ask than if you could have this be a 3/4 and then put a counter on something else. But that would be an insane rate at common, especially with lifelink. So I think this is fine where it's at. This is a very solid 4-drop in white at common, and it's going to bridge the gap between those different limited archetypes. Next, we've got Cathar Commando. Now, this is a reprint from, it's either Midnight Hunt or Crimson Vow. I believe it was Midnight Hunt. It's 1 and a white for a 3/1 human soldier with flash, and you can pay 1 and sacrifice this creature, destroy target artifact or enchantment. So, you know, this could kind of be reused as a removal spell, where you flash it into trade with something. But it also, that mode of blowing up an artifact or enchantment is something that you're never going to be sad to have access to in your deck for when it really does matter. Good cost. The fact that you can ambush with it is very valuable. And then we've got Banishing Light. We've seen a lot of variants of this. This is not quite the original, but close to it. This is definitely the one they print the most often. It's 2 and a white for an enchantment. When this enchantment enters, exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until this enchantment leaves the battlefield. It's a lower power set, so a lower power of Banishing Light effect in terms of the actual card Banishing Light itself is pretty appropriate here. Definitely going to be a solid piece of removal at common. Next, we'll move into the best white uncommons, and we've got Sunblessed Healer here. This card is great. It's 1 and a white for a 3/1 lifelink, but it's also got Kicker for 1 and a white. When this creature enters, if it was kicked, return target non-land permanent card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So if you've got these kind of aggro decks, these decks that are relying on small creatures, then as a 4-drop, you get a 3/1 lifelink and you get one of those back. Or just as a 2-drop, you get a 3/1 lifelink, and that's very solid. So the flexibility on this card, I think, really pushes it over the edge. And then next we've got a reprint of an absolute classic. Shout out to Dave. Loves this card. This is Savannah Lions. Single white for 2/1 cat at uncommon with no rules text, right? This is a vanilla creature. And just a 1 mana 2/1 unlimited. Maybe doesn't quite cut it these days. You've looked at those sideways for probably a few years now. But I think since we're going back to a core set, and this is much more low power, as well as since there's sort of a cat typal theme within the set that this contributes to, it's very solid. It's also important to note here, the draftable main set, the one that we're talking about, has some light cat themes. It has some light elf themes, and there's a few other themes that are kind of seeded in the set but don't pan out within limited. And I think the reason that those cards are kind of there is because they synergize with those typal elements within the starter collection. So there's some cross-pollination between products that leads to, I think, some mixed signals within the actual draft itself. So that's something to keep an eye on. There's going to be cards that care about cats, cards that care about elves, that I don't think are going to pan out in limited and are not something you should try to commit to in a draft. The cards are really there to interact with these cards from these separate products. But with all that said, there's a light cat theme in this set. I wouldn't pick Savannah Lions because it's a cat, right? But the 1 mana 2/1, very solid stats. And then we're going to move on to Angel of Finality. 3 and a white for a 3/4 flyer. When this creature enters, exile target player's graveyard. So there's a few graveyard synergies in the set. They're rather minor, but the fact that, it's just a 4 mana and a 3/4 flyer, which is a pretty solid rate. We're going back to a core set, so we're looking at just lower curve in general. 4 mana 3/4 flyer probably wouldn't make the cut in most modern limited formats, but this just looks quite low power, so I think it'll end up being fine, and it gives you an edge against those decks that might care about bringing something back from the graveyard, right? We've got like a pretty solid Eternal Witness variant in this format. There's a few spells with flashback, so this line of text is going to be relevant relatively often. Now we're going to move on to the best blue commons. We've got Big Fin Bouncer to start. So it's 3 and a blue for a 3/2 Shark Pirate. When this creature enters, return target creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. So this is, a Manowar variant. We're paying 1 more mana to have 1 more power. And I think generally that's pretty fine. Manowar is still a very good limited card even today. And that 1 mana for an extra power, lets it trade up a little easier. Definitely solid. Then we've got Witness Protection. Now this was fine when it was in Streets of New Capenna. This is a single blue for an Aura enchant creature. Enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a green and white citizen creature with base power and toughness 1/1 named Legitimate Business Person. It loses all other colors, card types, creature types, and names. So pretty solid. We've seen this in recent sets have like Flash, and that definitely makes it a lot better. But just being able to clean up and otherwise quite difficult, or and otherwise quite difficult to deal with creature, and just making it a 1/1, kind of not quite removing it from the board, but making it a lot less relevant. And then we've got Erudite Wizard, 2 and a blue for a 2/3 human wizard. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So this is not exactly one of the limited archetypes, but it is sort of, it feels like each color kind of has its own small thing that it's trying to do, not crossing over with any other colors, right? White has cats, green has elves, and blue kind of has this draw a second card in a turn thing. So there's a few ways to do that. There's cards like Think Twice, in the format. But yeah, I mean, if you're just able to do this once, you pay the 3 mana and you have a 3/4. If you're able to do it twice, obviously it feels great. So I think this card's very solid. The only time it's really going to be struggling is against aggro decks, where you can't really afford to be playing a 3 mana 2/3 and then having it be up to scale later. We'll move on to the best blue uncommons. We're going to start with Feybloom Trick. 2 and a blue for an instant. Create 2 1/1 blue fairy creature tokens with flying. When you do, tap target creature an opponent controls. So these Frostlinks effects just kind of keep getting better. Right? We saw one with flying. This one separates it into 2 flying bodies, which I do think is better. And as well, it's an instant. So it's not going to stun their creature, but you can tap it down like when they go to try to attack with it. So you kind of get that same sort of effect. Very, very solid 2 1/1 flying bodies at instant speed for 3 mana, and you get to tap something. And as well, that tapping is a reflexive trigger, which is really important. So if it were worded differently, if it were worded like tap target creature and opponent controls, you make 2 fairies, then if they were to sack the creature in response, you wouldn't get the fairies. But by making it a reflexive trigger, they make it not only so that they can't remove the creature in response and not give you the fairies, but also so that you don't have to declare what you're trying to tap down until the spell has resolved and you've got your fairies. Next, we've got Mischievous Mystic. This is 1 and a blue for a 2/1 human wizard with flying. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 blue fairy creature token with flying. So this is sort of playing into that same theme we saw seeded into blue in this set. And this seems like just a great rate, right? A 2 mana 2/1 flyer is just fine, but if you're able to get that second card, you're going to make another 1/1 flyer, and then you're just feeling great about the amount of mana that you spent on this spell. And then, speaking of ways to draw a second card in a turn, we've got this Skyship Buccaneer. 3 double blue for a 4/3 human pirate with flying and raid. When this creature enters, if you attack this turn, draw a card. So that raid mechanic has appeared in a couple different sets, and basically it just encourages aggression in the limited format, right? So you have to have attacked in order to get your raid effects. In this case, this is becoming a very, very good 2-for-1, right? A 5 mana 3/4 flyer, excuse me. That draws a card is just a very solid raid and limited. So filling your deck with flyers makes it a little easier to get raid, right? That evasion lets you attack safely so that you can get the full value out of your raid cards. But sometimes you just got to throw a little 1/1 into your opponents, maybe do your best to bluff a combat trick so they don't block, and you get to keep your guy, and then draw your card. We'll move on to the best black commons now, and no surprise, 2 of these are removal spells, returning as reprints from previous limited formats. So we've got Eaten Alive. This is a single black for sorcery, but as an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature or pay 3 and a black, exile target creature or planeswalker. So you can, just pay 5. As a sorcery to exile target creature or planeswalker, or you can sack a creature and pay 1. Neither of those feel great unrate, but the flexibility is what makes it a solid removal spell. And we've got Bacon to a Pie. This is from original Eldraine, Wilds of Eldraine. Throne of Eldraine. So this is 2 and double black for an instant. Destroy target creature, create a food token. And this was fine in its initial limited format. I think it'll be fine here as well, especially since we've got white-black having this sort of caring about gaining life synergy. We got Vampire Soulcaller. 4 and a black for a 3/2 Vampire Warlock with flying. This creature can't block. When this creature enters, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So, you've got this Raise Dead effect stapled to a pretty decent body that's going to be ideally hitting for 3 in the air every turn, or at the very least attacking and maybe trading with something. Pretty solid. There's not much to say about it. It's just a very decent 2-for-1 on a flying body. We're going to move on to the best black uncommons. We've got Arbiter of Woe, 4 and double black for a 5/4 demon. Now, as additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature. It's got flying, and when this creature enters, each opponent discards a card and loses 2 life. You draw a card and gain 2 life. So, we got to do some quick math on this, right? It is a 3-for-2. But, that little life drain is going to remove some pressure against aggressive decks, put a little pressure on your opponent, on top of that 5/4 flying body, which is, gonna give you a clock that your opponent just has to answer, and that they're less likely to be able to answer because maybe you discarded the last card in their hand, right? So very solid there. Then we've got Revenge of the Rats. Now, this is kind of a build-around a la Spider Spawning. This is 2 and double black for a sorcery. Create a tapped 1/1 black rat creature token for each creature card in your graveyard. And then you can flash this back for 2 and double black. So, pretty simple to build around this card, right? You want as many methods of self-mill as possible, because you want to just dump creature cards into your graveyard, as well as potentially mill copies of Revenge of the Rats if you can get 1 or 2 of these, right? And then you have this just dump of a bunch of 1/1s from the graveyard, right? Kind of coming out of nowhere. Now, coming in tapped is important, right? You can make all these rats, but if your opponent was about to finish you off, then it doesn't stop them, right? Because you can't block with the rats immediately. But as far as the rats being your way to actually close out the game, it's very reasonable, right? Or if we go back to the original Innistrad block limited, where that spider spawning deck existed, a bunch of 1/2 reach creatures absolutely could close out the game. And then we'll move on to Vampire Nighthawk. Now, this is a certified classic. This is a reprint from original Zendikar block. This is 1 and double black for a 2/3 Vampire Shaman with flying, death touch, and lifelink. And those 3 keywords have aged like fine wine, right? This is a great clock. It can trade with something and gain you 2 life in a pinch. I think it's, just about as good today as it was in 2010 when we first got to play with it in Limited. Not to mention the fact that it synergizes with the Life Gain Matters deck that we're going to talk about, that's present in Black-White, and I think very strong. So yeah, Vampire Nighthawk, very good. We'll move on to the best red commons. We've got Gorehorn Raider. Now, I believe this is basically just a creature type change to a card that existed in Ixalan. This is 4 and a red for a 4/4 Minotaur Pirate with Raid. When this creature enters, if you attack this turn, this creature deals 2 damage to any target. So I think the way that this is mostly going to shake out is sometimes you're going to be very aggressive, you're going to be hitting your opponent for 2 at the dome, and then sometimes you're going to be doing combat and then using this as sort of like a way to finish off a creature that ate one of your creatures in combat, right? With that raid ability. And I think you're going to be pretty happy with it either way. Just a 5-mana 4/4 plus a shock is pretty solid. And then we've got Burst Lightning. Speaking of shocks, this is a strictly better shock. It is a single red for an instant with Kicker for 4. Burst Lightning deals 2 damage to any target. If this spell is kicked, it deals 4 damage instead. So it's shock, which is very solid and limited, or like a sort of slightly worse but more flexible Lava Axe, right? You can use this to remove a bigger thing. You can use this to deal 4 to your opponent if they're close to dead. And there's actually a lot of cards that hit face in this set. There's that new Lightning Bolt variant, Bolt Wave, that, there might be kind of an aggressive, like, burn sort of deck in this format, where once you get your opponent to a low enough life total, you have top deck options that can just kill them. In a way that doesn't tend to feel like it's super viable in recent limited formats. So I'm curious to see how that ends up. But ultimately, Burst Lightning is very flexible as a removal spell, so you're going to be happy to get any number of copies that you can. And then we've got Goblin Borders, 2 and a red for a 3/2 Goblin Pirate Raid. This creature enters with a +1/+1 counter on it if you attacked this turn. So very simple, sort of aggressive card, 3-mana 4/3, but only if you were attacking that turn. So, encourages you to be aggressive, gives you that decent ball of stats. Next, we're going to talk about the best red uncommons. We're going to start with Bulk Up, which is just a very solid combat trick. It's 1 and a red for an instant, double target creature's power until end of turn, and then it's got flashback for 4 and double red. So essentially, it's going to be a surprise the first time. The second time, maybe you flash it back to close out the game when there's not anything they could do about it. But doubling a creature's power for 2 mana at instant speed is very solid, right? You can really punish your opponent for not blocking by casting this Bulk Up, and then maybe in the following turn, having a burn spell to sort of finish them off. We've got Fiery Annihilation, 2 and a red for an instant. Fire Annihilation deals 5 damage to target creature. Exile up to 1 target equipment attached to that creature. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. So 3 mana for 5 damage at instant speed is just really great rate for starters, right? But that little clause of like exiling an equipment attached to that creature is a nice like little rider. And then the if that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. You're shutting off any death triggers. You're shutting off their way to get that creature back. Basically just you would always play a 3 mana 5 damage at instant speed removal spell. But those 2 little extra lines of text are just kind of icing on the cake. So we're gonna be happy to play any number of copies of this. And then last but not least, we've got Shivan Dragon. This card's all the way from Alpha. I believe this is the first time it's ever been printed at Uncommon for a limited format. But for those who don't know, it's 4 and double red, so 6 mana for a 5/5 dragon with flying. And for single red, you can give this creature +1/0 until end of turn. Just a great card, right? It's a solid clock, and if you're willing to dump a bunch of mana into it, it's an even solider clock. You can get to a position very easily where this plus the mana that you have access to is just lethal to your opponent. So Shivan Dragon, very solid card. Crazy to see it at Uncommon, but I mean, probably appropriate. This was at Rare and Dominaria Remastered, and it was just okay. Or it was good, but only because it was being compared mostly to other cards from the 90s. This card can't be at Rare in a normal limited format, but seeing it on Uncommon is very solid. I apologize, that's the neighbor dog freaking out about something. We're going to move on to the best green commons. Here's Wary Thespian. This is a reprint from March of the Machine. It's 1 and a green for a 3/1 cat druid. When this creature enters or dies, surveil 1. So just giving you that card selection, right? If I am keeping an opening hand that's only got 2 lands, but it's got a Wary Thespian, I feel a lot safer keeping that hand. And there's something to be said for that, right? Helping you make sure you get your 3rd land, or make sure you don't get a 5th land, depending on what that hand looked like when you mulliganed. That's exactly what you want from your 2-drop. Not to mention the light ability to fuel the graveyard with this Surveil that's going to, synergize with some of the elements in the set. Yeah, it just, this card has a lot more depth, a lot more texture than you would think it does just from reading it. So, happy to run any number of copies of this. Then we've got Ambush Wolf, 2 and a green for a 4/2 wolf with flash. When this creature enters, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. So sort of like we talked about with Brutal Cathar when we were talking about the best white commons. This can be used as a removal spell. You've got that ambush. But the fact that you can exile a card from a graveyard as well, is a little like bonus line of text, right? Your opponent has a flashback thing, you just get rid of it. Make sure that you understand how priority works and that you're doing that before they have the opportunity to cast it. But, putting that aside, the fact that this can be used as a removal spell, this can be flashed on your opponent's end step for 4 damage that they weren't accounting for on your next turn, right? One of the limited archetypes cares lightly about having creatures of 4 or greater power, so, this can fulfill that condition on a good rate. Yeah, just a good common. And then we've got Treetop Snare Spinner. Now, reading this card, I really would have thought it was an uncommon. There's a lot of text on there, and it's relevant text. This is 3 and a green for a 1/4 spider with reach and Death Touch. And for 2 and a green, put a +1/+1 counter target creature you control. Activate only as a sorcery. Now, a 1/4 reach Death Touch for 4 mana is just a very, very solid blocker. It's going to make your opponent's attacks quite bad. Because in order to trade with this, the thing needs to have 4 power. And it's going to get traded with because this has Death Touch, right? So you can sit behind this for a long time. And not only that, but on a common, this gives you something to do with your mana while you sit behind it. It can buff up itself, right? Worst case scenario. Or you can put counters on a threat to be attacking with while you sit behind this. So you have good attacks. You have increasingly good attacks because you're able to increase the size of your creature. While this prevents your opponent from having good attacks at all. So this card seems like sort of a one-stop shop for just dominating the board state. Especially as far as commons go. So Treetop Snare Spinner, I think, is kind of crazy. And then we'll get into the best green uncommons. Now, one of the designers of the set was talking about we need to figure out what this generation's crawl worm is going to look like. And here it is. It's Quakestrider Ceratops. 3 green, so 6 mana for a dinosaur. 12/8. No rules text. This is a vanilla creature. I think 6 mana for a 12/8 is probably good enough. I think you probably play this. Hits your opponent twice, they die. 8 toughness is a lot to double block through for any deck. Not to mention the fact that we've got this next card, Overrun, which just, lines up with it in an interesting way. Overrun is, of course, a reprint. It's 2 and triple green for a sorcery. Creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample until end of turn. So giving Quake Strider Ceratops as well as just another creature trample, probably going to be lethal. Quake Strider Ceratops is a very solid card. Overrun, another very solid card. Sort of incentivizes you to go wide, which is not necessarily going to be the easiest thing to do in green, but definitely overrunning with 3 creatures out, you're adding 9 more damage to the board. And the fact that it's a sorcery, is unfortunate, but it's not going to matter that much because you're hoping to overrun and present lethal. Next, we've got Elvish Regrower. So I was kind of hoping, not necessarily hoping, because it would be a very powerful card to put into Pioneer. Pioneer might not be able to handle it, but I was kind of hoping Eternal Witness would be in this set. It's an iconic Magic card. They're going back to iconic Magic cards. I was kind of hoping we would see Eternal Witness, but this is the next best thing. This is 2 and double green for a 4/3 elf druid. When this creature enters, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand, right? So a little bigger, a little more expensive, and has to be a permanent card. But in limited, most of your deck is going to be creatures, and this returns one of them to your hand at a very good rate. I would say this is much better than like a Pizza Rhino. So I think you're happy to play any number of copies of this that you can get. It's probably green's best uncommon. It's a 2-for-1, and that card you're getting back is probably going to be gas, especially if the game has gone on long enough. So we're going to move on to talking about the limited archetypes. I'm going to discuss each one briefly. The main sort of overarching point that I want to get through is that these archetypes are a little softer than they are in most sets, right? They're not sort of hard line, this is what these colors need to be doing. It's just kind of, this is what you are sort of passively rewarded for in each color pair. Not something that you want to make sure like, oh, I need this number of flyers or I need this number of creatures with 4 or greater power, but just something to be kind of aware of. So we'll talk about white-blue flyers, and here's Empyrean Eagle. This is a reprint from a core set. It's a 3-mana 2/3 flyer. Other creatures you control flying get +1/+1. So, the more of these that you draft or that you get in your sealed pool, all right, the more you're going to want to look out and make sure you have other flyers that this can kind of benefit, because a 3-mana 2/3 flyer without any other text is pretty rough. But yeah, these white-blue decks, it's going to be kind of a tempo deck with flyers. You're going to want to use your removal to remove your opponent's creatures in the air so that you can kill them quickly. Next, we're going to talk about blue-black Threshold / Graveyard. I think this is going to end up shaping up as sort of a mid-range deck that's just making use of the graveyard as a toolbox, as well as, there's a few commons and uncommons that have like a Threshold ability. Where, the more you can fill up the graveyard, the better it is. So we've got Dreadwing Scavenger, 1 a blue and a black for a 2/2 Nightmare Bird with flying. Whenever this creature enters or attacks, draw a card, then discard a card. And then Threshold, this creature has +1/+1 and Death Touch, as long as there are 7 or more cards in your graveyard. So we last saw Threshold in Bloomburrow, where it was the blue-black Rats mechanic. We see it on a few cards in this set, but, not as heavily. I think even like ignoring that Threshold ability though, 3-mana 2/3 or 3-mana 2/2, when this enters or attacks, draw a card and discard a card. That is already an insane rate, right? Looting on enter or attack on a 3-mana 2/2 flyer, you would play all day. And the fact that you have to be in 2 colors for it is not that big of a deal. There are also common life gain duels in the set. So, it's not going to be that hard to fix your mana. If you want to splash a 3rd color, that's going to be a little more iffy, but definitely just for your 2-color deck, right? So next we're going to talk about black-red aggro, and this is just, your sort of bread-and-butter aggro deck. A lot of these cards have raid, so they care about having attacked this turn, which you're going to want to do anyway, because you got to get your opponent's life total to 0. You got to just turn creatures sideways. Perforating Artist is one such card. It's 1 a black and a red for a 3/2 Death Touch. Raid, At the beginning of your end step, if you attacked this turn, each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent of their choice or discards a card. So it's interesting it specifies sacrifices a non-land permanent of their choice or discards a card. I guess because this is sort of a new player's set and they want to make sure it's clear that if they're sacrificing, they get to choose. But yeah, I mean, this kind of effect, this sort of Torment of Hailfire, Turgid's Lantern sort of effect, has proven to be pretty solid and limited if you can repeat it, and raid is not that much to ask. Obviously, you want to keep this guy around, and he's not going to be there to trigger on your end step if he has to trade during combat, so you want to make sure that you have like some other creature that you get to attack with so that you can trigger this guy, or, you know, best case scenario, you've just completely wiped out your opponent's creatures and you can get in for free, in which case this guy's going to close out the game incredibly quick. Next, we've got red-green ferocious / ramp, right? So that ferocious mechanic, creatures controlling creature with power 4 or greater matters. We've got Ruby Daring Tracker as the signpost uncommon. There's a reprint from Wilds of Eldraine. She's a red and a green for a 1/2 legendary human scout with haste, and whenever she attacks while you control a creature with power 4 or greater, she gets +2/+2 until end of turn. And you can tap her for a red or a green mana. So, you know, you're powering out that creature with 4 or more power, and then once you no longer need her for that mana to power those creatures out, she's ready to join combat as a 3/4, right, if you've cast a big enough creature, which is a great rate. So, you know, very solid card. Then we've got green-white +1/+1 counters. So this is interesting. This is very rarely do we see a card that debuted in a Modern Horizons set getting reprinted into Standard, but here we are. We've got Good Fortune Unicorn. 1 a green and a white for our signpost uncommon, 2/2 Unicorn, so 3 mana 2/2 Unicorn. Whenever another creature you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. So even if your deck doesn't care about +1/+1 counters inherently, this is just a great card to sort of reward you for going wide, right? Every creature you play after this just comes in with a counter. Doesn't feel great when this gets removed quickly and it didn't do anything. And doesn't feel great if, like, your opponent's already ahead on board, because it's just not going to be enough stats. I definitely think this is one of the weaker signpost uncommons compared to something like the black-red one, or maybe some of the ones that we'll see in the enemy color pairs. But it gets the job done. You know, you curve it into Tree Stop Snare Spinner, and that's going to be like a 2/5. Yeah, it lives or dies by what you curve it into. It's obviously great with like things that make multiple tokens, because then both of those tokens are getting a +1/+1 counter, and you're getting kind of double the value out of the unicorn. But broadly, you know, this archetype just cares about putting +1/+1 counters on your creatures. This Inspiring Paladin gives them all first strike on your turn if they have counters on them, which is very relevant. And you'll see other cards like that. Moving into the enemy color pairs, we've got one that I always love to play when it's available, which is Black-White Life Gain. Fiendish Panda is the uncommon. It is 2 a white and a black for a 3/2 Bear Demon. Whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And when this creature dies, return another target non-bear creature card with mana value less than or equal to this creature's power from your graveyard to the battlefield. So they put non-bear so that you can't, like, you know, put a counter on your Fiendish Panda. When it dies, bring it back. Put a counter on that one. When it dies, bring the other one back. This card's great. Also, I neglected to put it in the slideshow. I put Dazzling Angel in instead, but Ajani's Pridemate is in this set, so just a 2 mana 2/2. Whenever you gain life, put a counter on it. Very solid. But yeah, I mean, you can kind of figure out what this deck is about. It incentivizes you for gaining life by giving you things that like drain your opponent when you gain life, put counters on themselves when they gain life. A lot of new players love gaining life. They sort of overvalue their life total, and they have to kind of learn the lesson that the only point of life that matters is the last. But when you're looking at a limited archetype like this, right, it pays you off for gaining life, which is something you kind of inherently already want to do. So pretty powerful here, I think. You know, it's definitely one of the more do the thing or don't limited archetypes compared to like green-white +1/+1 counters. Like, you can have a couple cards that care about it, and it's like not a big deal that they don't synergize with the rest of your deck. But with this life gain thing, like, you really need the payoffs in order to make it work, but I think they've seeded enough payoffs into the set that it's not going to be super hard to make it come together, especially with cards like Dazzling Angel here that can kind of repeatedly allow you to gain life off of one card multiple times. And we've got white-red go wide / tokens. So this the Signpost Uncommon is a reprint from a core set. It's Heroic Reinforcements, 2 red and a white for a sorcery. Create 2 1/1 white soldier creature tokens. Until end of turn, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain haste. So not a great card into a gummed up board state, but very good card into an empty board. And then there are of course several like +2/0 to your team sort of effects. We've got this Armasaur Guide, 4 and a white for 4 vigilance. You know, when you attack with 3 or more creatures, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So there's some payoffs for going wide, some sort of battalion style payoffs. This is definitely, I think, going to be the most aggressive deck. Either this or Black Red are going to be the most aggressive decks in the format. But I think this is a very, very solid archetype. Time will tell whether, you know, this aggressive deck will be able to compete in the format with like a lot of, you know, 1/4s and 1/3s, but I think it'll be pretty solid. And then we've got Red Blue Spellslinger. You know, it feels like half of all limited formats have this as the Red Blue deck. And, you know, in a core set, it makes sense for them to go with that. So we've got Balmor, Battle Mage Captain, a reprint from Dominaria United, I believe. Blue and a red for a 1/3 Bird Wizard, legendary, with flying. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, creatures you control get +1/0 and gain trample until end of turn. So it's sort of this prowess effect for all your creatures. And then we also have a reprint of Tolarian Terror at common, so that's going to remain legal in standard for a while. It's 6 and a blue for a 5/5 Serpent, costs 1 less for each instant and sorcery in your graveyard, and has Ward 2. And then this Crackling Cyclops, 3-mana 0/4, gets +3/0 when you cast a non-creature spell. This limited format comes up this limited archetype, comes up all the time. I don't really need to explain how it works again. But basically you want to fill your deck with cheap spells that like act as removal, things like that Burst Lightning that we saw, or cheap spells that like replace themselves, things like Opt, so that you can synergize with these sort of more powerful payoffs. Next, we'll talk about blue-green landfall and ramps. We've got Tatiova Benthic Druid, which is a reprint from original Dominaria. She's 3 a green and a blue for a 3/3 legendary Merfolk Druid with landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, you gain 1 life and draw a card. And then we've got, of course, some other landfall cards. This guy that makes 1/1s, this guy that taps things and stuns them. And the idea is basically that you've got these big ramp payoffs and these landfall abilities that will like keep you alive while you get to them. Not much to say about this one either, right? It's a very simple archetype. It's sort of not necessarily as much control leaning, but like sort of a higher curve mid-range deck. And then we've got green-black Morbid. Now, Morbid was a mechanic from Shadows of Innistrad, Dark Ascension, which paid you off for if a creature died this turn. So it's kind of like Raid, where Raid cares about if you attacked this turn. Morbid cares about if a creature died this turn. And it doesn't have to be your creature or your opponent's creature. It can be either. But we've got Wardens of the Cycle, 1 a black and double green for a 3/4 Elf Warlock. With Morbid, at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, choose 1, you gain 2 life, or you draw a card and you lose 1 life. So I think, you know, 9 times out of 10 you're going to be drawing the card and losing the life, but you can gain the life if you're against an aggro deck, I guess. Yeah, you want to make sure that like during your turn you're either using removal or you're going into combat, so you can proc this Morbid effect as often as possible. And there's like this Tragic Banshee. It can remove things if you have Morbid, and this Cackling Prowler that's like a ward creature that gets bigger every end step if you have Morbid. This card seems very, very solid for a common. But yeah, I mean, creatures are going to die in limited anyway. Some of the sort of more powerful ways to play these cards are like doing combat before you've actually cast the Morbid card, so that your opponent doesn't know that you're going to get a payoff for this trade happening. So you go into combat, try to get the trade, and then play like this Wardens of the Cycle or this Cackling Prowler and get that Morbid effect that your opponent was not aware they were giving you when they went for that trade. So that's going to be kind of how you're leveraging that within this sort of context. Last but not least, we're going to talk about the best bombs in the set. Now, this is just not a very bomby set in general. The rares and mythics are not super powerful compared to other recent sets. There's a Planeswalker in each color. Some of them are reprints, 2 of them are new. Only one of the new ones is good. The other one is 7 mana, and it's just a little awkward. And then like the other ones are kind of like the white reprint is Johnny Color of the Pride, which is like pretty bad. Vivian is pretty mid. The Liliana is very good, so we'll talk about that in Best Bombs. But like, yeah, it's a pretty toned down set, as you'll see when we talk about Best Bombs. Like, these are cards that would definitely not be on my Best Bombs list in another set. So we'll talk about white. We've got Day of Judgment, classic board wipe, 2 and double white, destroy all creatures, sorcery. We've got a new card, Mythic, Valkyrie's Call, 3 and double white for an enchantment. Whenever non-token, non-angel creature you control dies, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. It has flying and is an angel in addition to its other types. They've been pretty inconsistent with cards like this on like just giving them ability permanently versus putting an ability counter on them, and I wish they would like kind of be more consistent there. But regardless, this brings back all of your this brings back all of your creatures when they die as +1/+1 counter flying angels. Crazy card. And then Celestial Armor, 3 and a white for an equipment with flash. When this equipment enters, attach it to target creature you control. That creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. And then equipped creature gets +2/+0 and has flying. And you can equip for 3 and a white later. So just a great combat trick. Slash protection from removal if that's how you need to use it, and then it just sticks around and like is a crazy way to close out the game. You know, as long as you have a creature, giving it +2/+0 and flying presents a really good clock in almost any board state. Move on to the best blue bombs, and blue is kind of hurting. You know, it seems like that with the commons and uncommons too, but it also seems that way with the rares. It just seems like they do not have quite as high card quality as the other colors. So we'll start with Archmage of Runes. 3 blue for a 3/6 giant wizard. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you draw a card. You know, not the easiest thing to make work unlimited, but like really blue just does not have very many good rares. We got Kaito Cunning Infiltrator. This is a new Planeswalker, and this card does seem very solid for what it's worth. This is 1 and double blue for a 3 mana legendary Planeswalker. Kaito, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put a loyalty counter on Kaito. So right off the bat, that's pretty good. +1, up to 1 target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. Draw a card, then discard a card. So that's going to guarantee that that creature can hit and give Kaito another loyalty. -2, create a 2/1 blue ninja creature token. And then -9, you get an emblem with whenever a player casts a spell, you create a 2/1 blue ninja creature token. So that ult is like not as out of reach as it is for most Planeswalkers because he has this inherent way to put more loyalty counters on him, but I think most of the time what you're going to be doing is you're going to be minusing to make that 2/1 and then trying to hit your opponent so you can make more 2/1s. Ideally each turn, like if this can make a 2/1 every turn, then it's insane. But if it just alternates between making a 2/1 and looting, then that's pretty good as well. Then we've got Curator of Destinies. This is 4 and double blue for a 5/5 Sphinx. Can't be countered. It's got flying. And when this creature enters, look at the top 5 cards of your library and separate them into a face-down pile and a face-up pile. An opponent chooses one of those piles, put that pile into your hand, and the other into your graveyard. Yeah, generally you should choose, you want to make the piles as even as possible, but you can, if you're like way behind, try to trick your opponent and, you know, get them to give you like 3 very good cards in exchange for like a bad card and a land being the face up pile. You know, this lets you play mind games with your opponent, and I can't give you like an objective best way to handle it for each possible case of what you flip off the top, but you want to try to kind of convince your opponent because they have to make the decision with limited information. You want to set it up in a way that like you think you can convince them to make the wrong decision. We'll move on to the best black bombs, and we're going to start with High Society Hunter. And this is really just not that much of a bomb, because there's really just not many bombs in black. There's not many bombs in the set in general, but I think, especially in black, it seems like white has the best bombs, and to a lesser extent, green. So we'll talk about High Society Hunter, 3 and double black for a 5/3 Vampire Noble with flying. Whenever this creature attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Whenever another non-token creature dies, draw a card. So yeah, you can sack your creatures to put counters on this and draw a card, which like you're not always going to want to do. So a lot of times it is going to end up just being a 5-mana 5/3 flyer. But when you do have those extra creatures you don't want lying around, putting counters on this and drawing a card is going to feel pretty good. And then we've got Liliana Dreadhorde General. This is a reprint from War of the Spark. And this card was, insane in that limited format. Going to be probably just as insane in this one. 4 and double black for a legendary planeswalker, Liliana. Starts with 6 loyalty. Whenever a creature you control dies, draw a card. +1, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. -4, each player sacrifices 2 creatures of their choice. It's interesting. This is the second time that we've seen sacrifices 2 creatures of their choice. So I wonder if this is just the new wording for every time you force someone to sack something, it specifies of their choice, which of course it always has been, but maybe that just... maybe in testing, they've had a lot of new players be confused by that and be like, well, if I'm making them sacrifice it, I get to choose, right? Anyway... the -9 is then each opponent chooses a permanent they control of each permanent type and sacrifices the rest. So a lot of times what you're going to be doing with this when it comes down is -4ing, hopefully wiping the board and drawing 2 cards, in which case, like, you're just absurdly ahead, right? You leave this around, it gets to plus to make more 2/2s, you've almost definitely won the game. But sometimes you're just going to be making those 2/2s and making combat worse for your opponent because if your creatures die, you draw cards. And that's not a once per turn. If multiple creatures are dying, you're drawing multiple cards. This card's just great. It seems pretty self-evidently great. Then we've got Runescarred Demon. This is a reprint. This is 5 and double black for a 6/6 demon with flying. When this creature enters, search your library for a card, put it in your hand, and then shuffle. So a lot of the time, you're going to be getting a removal spell to just get rid of one of your opponent's creatures. Or you're going to be getting a second bomb from your deck, maybe. That's a little win more, but I guess this lets you make sure that you get through, like, they have a removal spell for this, you grab the other best creature in your deck. Next we're going to move on to the best red bombs. We've got Krenko Mob Boss. This card is, known to run away with games, if not answered. He's 2 and double red for a legendary Goblin Warrior. He's a 3/3, and you can tap him to create X 1/1 red Goblin creature tokens, where X is the number of goblins you control. And of course, he counts himself. So if you don't have any other goblins out, he's going to make a 1/1, then he's going to make 2 1/1s, then he's going to make 4 1/1s, then he's going to make 8 1/1s, etc. And if you have other goblins that just happen to be in your deck, then he's going to make even more. Obviously, he gets answered by sorcery speed removal, and then he didn't do anything, but in the event that he doesn't, he just runs away with the game in an absurd degree. We've got Twin Flame Tyrant, 3 and double red for a 3/5 dragon with flying mythic. If a source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals double that damage instead. So it literally just doubles all your damage, right? And this time it's on a flying body instead of an enchantment. Commander players love those enchantments. Usually they're not great and limited. In this case, because it comes on what is effectively a 6/5 body, I'm going to go ahead and say it's very solid, especially because, you play it before combat, and then your combat is just explosive, right? You have double damage, and then this, what is essentially a 6/5 flyer, is going to stick around after. It can be a little bit awkward to, like, go to combat, your opponent blocks, you think you have this effect, and then they blow up the Twin Flame Tyrant at instant speed. Sometimes they can blow you out that way, but you can probably plan it such that you're not going to be devastated in that fashion necessarily. And then we've got Atali Primal Storm. This is a reprint from original Ixalan and also basically every red commander deck that has come out since. This is 4 and double red for a Elder Dinosaur, legendary 6/6. Whenever Atali attacks, exile the top card of each player's library. Then you may cast any number of spells from among those cards without paying their mana costs. So, of course, this can whiff, it can hit lands, it can hit a 2-drop or whatever, but pretty often it'll hit relevant things. It'll hit creatures, it'll hit removal spells, and you get 2 tries, because you get to do it off of your library and your opponent's library when this attacks. It's a big enough creature that it's probably going to be able to attack safely much of the time. It also casts the spells immediately, right? So even if they have okay blockers, if you hit a removal spell, you get lucky, you can get rid of one of them. Just a very solid, very, very solid card. We're going to move on to the best green bombs in the set, and we're going to start with this new card, this very solid new card, Sylvan Scavenging. 1 and double green for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, choose one. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, or create a 3/3 green raccoon creature token if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. So you're pretty much always going to want to make that 3/3. The only time you are going to put that +1/+1 counter on is if you can't make the 3/3 because you don't have a 4-power creature. But luckily, if you have one of the 3/3s remaining, you can put a counter on that, and then next turn you can make more 3/3s because it'll be a 4/4. So this card seems just absolutely backbreaking and limited. Really, the only time it's bad is if you don't have a creature, period. And if you do have a creature at all, then this card is going to run away with the game. It doesn't go on the creature itself. It's just an enchantment, so they get rid of the creature. You just draw another one, play it. So this card's very, very good. I think it's pretty obvious. We've got Quilled Great Worm. This is the green mythic. 4 and double green for a 7/7 worm with trample. So already just okay stats. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage during your turn, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. And then here's reminder text. It must survive to get the counters. Of course, it's a triggered ability, so it will die if it was not big enough. You may cast this card from your graveyard by removing 6 counters from among creatures you control in addition to paying its other costs. That's not going to happen super often unless it was already out and already made your army just absurdly huge. This card will run away with games very quickly. It deals combat damage at all, not combat damage to a player. So if you are already winning on board and you cast this, you are now winning on board by more than twice as much. This card is just absurd. We've got Spinner of Souls. This card's just really great at generating value. It's 2 and a green for a 4/3 Spider Spirit with Reach. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you may reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card in your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So every time one of your other non-token creatures dies, you're just going to replace it with a random creature from your deck. Very, very solid. Move on to the best multicolored and colorless bombs, and to be honest, there just weren't that many. We've got Coma, World Eater, 3 double green, double blue, so 7 mana for an 8/12 Serpent. This spell can't be countered. Trample, Ward 4, and whenever Coma deals combat damage to a player, create 4 3/3 blue Serpent creature tokens named Coma's Coil. So this card's just really, really good. That Ward 4 is going to be doing its best to make sure that you are at least going to make contact with this once. Because, your opponent has a 4 mana removal spell. It's now 8 mana. Your opponent has a 3 mana removal spell. It's 7 mana. So they have to be hitting the same land drops that you are and have that removal spell. Otherwise, you hit them once, you hit through with trample. Even if they somehow are able to kill this, maybe with like a Death Touch creature, most likely, you're going to get 12/12 in stats by making contact with them. So this is just a very, very powerful card. Then we've got Sire of 7 Deaths. 7 mana, 7/7 Eldrazi at Mythic. First Strike, Vigilance, Menace, Trample, Reach, Lifelink, Ward, pay 7 life. So there's 7 abilities on this 7/7 for 7. All of those abilities are relevant. Ward, pay 7 life is, sometimes going to not matter that much, but I think most of the time it is going to at least put them in a spot, if not, allow them to be dead to the rest of your creatures. And this pile of keyword abilities is obviously absurdly good. First Strike is going to prevent them from being killed in combat pretty much at all, in conjunction with Menace and Trample, Reach, and Lifelink. Lifelink and Vigilance, make this as good of a defensive tool as it is an offensive tool. Just very solid. The only thing that kind of hurts this is that it costs 7 mana, but, it's not that hard to make a limited deck that can semi-reliably cast a 7-drop. And then last but not least, we've got Alesha, who laughs at fate. This is, a callback to a classic character, a fan favorite from Fate Reforged, Alesha, who smiles at death. This is 1 a black and a red for a 2/2 legendary human warrior with First Strike. Whenever it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And, if it ended there, very, very solid. And then Raid, at the beginning of your end step, if you attacked this turn, return target creature card with mana value less than or equal to Alesha's power from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, you can put a 2-drop from the graveyard onto the battlefield immediately just the turn that you play this, which is insane, right? You can swing with your 2-drop, your opponent's like, okay, we could trade, whatever. And then you put this into play, immediately get the creature back. And that feels just backbreaking. Not to mention the fact that this just blocks and attacks really well because of that First Strike. So with that said, that's going to kind of close out my thoughts on the format. I know this is sort of a shorter one. This format's not super complicated. It's very similar to a core set. I don't think there hasn't been a core set since I started making these videos. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. Let me know if there's anything you think I missed that is actually part of the draft format. Let me know what archetype you're most excited about playing. Personally, for me, it's that white-black life gain deck. But I'm curious what you all think. Feel free to leave a comment. Let me know how you're feeling about Foundations. You think this format's going to be fun? Do you think it's going to be slow? Do you think it's going to be fast? Do you think it's going to fall to the curse of the previous core set formats where it's just not mechanically dense enough to be interesting for a length of time until the next set comes out? Do you think those archetypes that are kind of those synergies that are kind of seeded to synergize with the other products, the elf deck, the cat deck, the draw two cards deck, do you think those synergies are actually going to be able to pan out in the limited format because there's enough support for them? Maybe. Let me know in the comments below. And of course, I hope that this video has been of help to you, that you're able to use it to do a little better at your pre-release, at your Friday Night Magic drafts, and whatever else. And again, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And I hope you have a wonderful day.